Avatar and Brahmastra, two films that derive their names from Sanskrit. But these two films share more than just this mythical reference. Another link that binds these two films together is Dneg, the visual studio behind their stunning visual effects. In this episode, we are joined by Namit Malhotra, CEO of Dneg and the founder of Prime Focus Limited, the world's largest independent integrated media services company, to explore the intersection of cinema, tech, storytelling, and business. Let's dive straight in.
So, how are you?
I'm very well. How's everybody else here?
Everybody's doing great, I'm sure. So, not wasting a lot of time, we're going to cut through to, get and to know your journey and to bring in the facts I think the people should know who are trying to get in and get to know you as well. So, to probably begin with, I'm going to point out on something big that has recently happened. And we would love to know, firstly, that how was it on working on Brahmastra?
Actually, Brahmastra, I thought when you said recently, we just did Dune too. So I thought...
Yes, but with the Bollywood people...
Because Brahmastra is a little dated, but no, I think, the journey was incredible because, much like all of you here, we had a director in the frame of Ayan Mukherjee, who was a, very young, very capable, very dynamic guy who had a very successful startup and wanted to make something that he felt at the time India had not done before. And that's when he reached out and said, how can we bring, our capabilities into his vision? And that, I think, was a very formative step for how we got together. And then we ended up obviously pulling off what I think is a pretty spectacular experience for the Indian market and for the Indian audiences to have never necessarily witnessed that scale of storytelling and quality, presentation that I think is what Brahmastra stands for. So it was a great way to sort of open up the capabilities to Indian filmmakers and make sure that we can do things that everybody thinks only Hollywood can do and we can't do in India. So it was a nice way to make that happen.
Right. So is there any special moment or story that you have from Brahmastra to share with everybody, or do you think that it is definitely, important for people to know? Because I believe that a lot of times when people, think about behind the scenes, not everybody knows what goes into, see what they see on screen.
No, there's tremendous amount of work and effort, and it's not a few people. There are many, many hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people that are in the midst of creating all that visual imagery that you see. So from design to actually blending it with the story, the vision of the filmmaker, the budgets, to make it all happen, the use of technology. It's a pretty complex piece that has to come together. I think for me, the journey with someone like Ayan was very interesting because I found in him that enthusiasm of a very youthful, person who was incredibly curious and very, committed and passionate to his vision. And, he would not take no for an answer for anything. And that reminded me of my own sort of very, very early days of my youth and how I built my business. And that sort of became infectious because, one of the things that I'd say to all of you here, that youth is is the power of the world, basically, that you, at this point in time in your life, may not realize how much power and how much capability you have because you may not have the experience, but it's that energy that you can dream it and you can do it is what we live with. And the industry I operate in is all about that. It's all about if you can dream it, you can do it. And that sort of is the part that I would sort of share with everyone here. But in Brahmastra, it was a long journey, so from the actors all the way to the filmmaker, the studios. The film was over budget, it was complicated, nobody had done it before. So we had many challenges along the way, but incredibly pleased about how it all came together and how we really made it happen, which I think is ultimately the outcome that we all want. In spite of all challenges, how you persevere and pursue your outcome, doesn't matter whether it was COVID that came in the middle or whether it was all other challenges of, just making things happen. And that credit goes to the filmmaker squarely.
So speaking about filmmakers and directors, is there a specific name that you have in your favorite list? Because I'm sure that you have, worked with so many. I'm sure there's one that, every time when we talk to a crew person or there's a, HOD or whosoever is the vendor on set, everybody has this, one favorite person to work with. So who is your favorite director?
No, my favorite director, obviously has evolved over the years because I myself wanted to be a director when I was in my teens. And back in the day, I was a big fan of Mukul Anand, who passed away, before I could get the opportunity to work for him or with him or learn from him. I watched Agnipath maybe 65 times as a young, enthusiastic person who wanted to be in the movies. But in today's time, my favorite director of all time is Christopher Nolan. And, he won the Best Director, Best Filmmaker award for the Oscar for Oppenheimer. And we've collaborated with him all the way from Batman Begins to Oppenheimer. We won 3 Oscars for his movies. So it's not because of that, but because of just the sheer vision and the ability to tell complex stories with a great vision, with great characters and music that embodies his entire style of filmmaking is just exemplary. I'm not much younger than him, but I still feel incredibly enthused about the kind of passion and the kind of creative vision he brings to each and every project is incredible. And because you're all studying business and you have to, in our industry, every new film is actually like a new business. Because you go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. And that's why, when you have a filmmaker like that, you see the ability to really imagine what that next story is going to be and how you can actually better yourself at each step. And that is pretty phenomenal, in terms of what he has achieved.
Right. And speaking of visions, I think the great stories that I've worked, Dune is there, then, Stranger Things is there. So how do you think that it has been different? How do you think that the challenges on sets, I'm sure, speaking and knowing this industry in and out, it has been, into the nature that every time there's a new script, there are new challenges. So do you have any certain, challenges which has actually, left you with an impact which has made you learn from it tremendously?
So, on one hand, obviously, as I mentioned, Christopher Nolan and his incredible vision. On the other hand, we've also had the good fortune of collaborating with Denis Villeneuve, who's done the last 2 Dune movies and also did Blade Runner before that. Again, that's another style of filmmaker who I believe has, in terms of the kind of work we've produced, I think sets a new benchmark in terms of quality storytelling. And that again, the vision of that again goes back to the director. And someone like that who has the ability to imagine and execute things that are within the confines or constraints of the world that he creates. But the way he can really drive all his key department heads, including visual effects, is pretty extraordinary. When we did Dune 1, we got the Oscar for it, but it, in my mind, was not just another Oscar win. It was actually repositioning or re-establishing the next level up in the industry and in what we do. The use of technology, the use of creative capabilities, the approach to that absolute detailed storytelling is impeccable. So, it's masters like this who actually come in and drive and raise the bar for everybody who work on their projects. Whether it's a business or a movie or whatever, it's always trying to make sure you're harnessing, the talent and the people that are actually around you. And you need someone like that who raises the bar each time to really drive the outcome.
Right. So speaking of businesses, as you said, at each point, students out here at Masters Union, we aim to actually excel to starting something new or whatever we're working at. So here, do you think that you have a certain, key when we speak of, facing challenges? So is there anything specific that you keep in mind? Because as you said that every project is a new challenge. So is there a vision, a particular thing that you keep in mind that, okay, if this is going to be there, this is how it should be handled? What is the handling strategy of those every new business that we talk about?
See, without trying to be too, academic, because that's not who I am, but, there are 3 key words that I find very interesting in the world of what we do. You know, you use the word challenge. So challenge, conflict, communication. You know, the three words that I believe, the three C's in how I see them, are the challenges are obviously critical, because if there's no challenge, there's no motivation to try and do something that's not been done before or you've not done before. So the positive, spin on that is that challenge is really exciting yourself and really raising your energy to do something that's sort of pushing the bar or pushing yourself to either learn or execute or try something that hasn't been played out. And in terms of what that challenge therefore creates is conflict, because you're going to do something that you've not done before, so you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have people that are not going to trust you. You're going to have situations that you've not anticipated. So conflict will come around in various ways that you can't even imagine, but it's real. So challenge you take on, conflict is real because it's going to happen in whatever you do, whatever you pursue. And then the way you resolve it, to my mind, is through effective communication, because in a world where we live with human beings and people, an ability to effectively communicate your ideas, your aspirations, your needs, your challenges or conflicts is a great way to step ahead. And therefore, as every young person who's trying to drive up their own capability, you've got to really be able to communicate, whatever that form is, and whatever that methodology is. You got to be able to have effective communication so that you can resolve that challenge, resolve that conflict, and move on. And that, I think, is incredibly important, because otherwise you're dealing with, you'll keep going from one issue to another, and you'll keep getting psyched out of your mind that you thought this was what it's going to be, and it turned out to be something else. You thought this person was not going to be happy with you, but it turned out there's more than you thought or less than you thought. Sometimes the results are greater than you think. So, because you're always dealing with the unknown. And that is where you got to have a mind and an attitude to sort of deal with these scenarios as effectively as you can. And that will make you much more adept and comfortable with whatever curveballs are thrown at you, or whatever things that you didn't anticipate play out.
Right. So a very interesting thing that in the journey that has you've been a part of, you've gone from serving in India to serving globally. So what is the exact so if you have to throw your thoughts on that.
I think it sort of it builds itself on the same premise of taking on a challenge. So I started in 1995 in a garage with 3 guys who taught me computer graphics. I was 18, they were 20. It was a 6-week course, and I never wanted to do computer graphics. My father encouraged me to do something. I just finished my 12th grade, and I signed up for the program, learned how to use a computer, learned how to do stuff that I wasn't actually interested in. And then it turns out that as opportunities presented itself, the 3 guys who taught me, I kind of hired them. And we set up in a garage in Mumbai, with an Apple computer and a 7 lakh rupees loan from the bank, and got our startup going. And then you kind of fast forward 10 years, and from 95 to 2005, we were running what was the most successful, fast-growing Indian post-production services company, working with all the top filmmakers and ad filmmakers and television shows, in that time. And then it got to me as a, 29, 30-year-old to say, okay, what's next? Because I've kind of done whatever I had to do in India. There's a law of diminishing returns. Like, now I can get another 3 projects, but that's not going to really move the needle. So I said, if we can do that in India with having zero talent, not experience in technology, not getting paid anything close to what people in the West get paid for the same service, and seeing the success the IT majors had, I said, let's try and do that in entertainment. I come from a 3-generation film family background, only to say that my grandfather shot, he was a cameraman, shot color films in the 50s. And what he basically achieved was the first time where a Hollywood, cameraman worked with an Indian cameraman, and they brought color film to India. And then you flash forward 60 years, and the 2 industries kind of do not talk to each other. And my favorite line is, that we knew how to make movies before we knew how to use computers. And for what it's worth, we had more people in the West believing in our computer and engineering skills than we had in our filmmaking skills. And that, coming from a filmmaking background, I was like, why don't we use our technological and creative capabilities and do something like what the IT guys did? So again, pretty simplistic thinking. And then in 2006, I decided to take a step into the Western world and bought companies in the in the UK, followed by companies in the US and UK, US and Canada, and try to build this global platform so we can actually seamlessly work together. Because in our industry, the word outsourcing is a terrible word. No big director or filmmaker wants to believe that their creativity is being outsourced, because every film is like a new business and it's like their child. So they want to believe that you've got the best capabilities that are coming together. And that really, established a completely new paradigm in my life to sort of understand how similar but different the businesses and the industries were, the protocols and the style in which I would work in Mumbai or in Chennai or Hyderabad was totally different to how the studios and the big Hollywood filmmakers would work in terms of their structure, their protocol, their process. Even though in the end what we do is exactly the same, but how we do it is very different. And that took a while to really understand and appreciate the nuances of culture and all the things that you cannot learn in a school, all the things that nobody in the world can teach you. Because I may have understood the technology, I may have understood that I have raised the right amount of money, we may have credentials and capabilities, but what nobody is teaching you is how different we are as people. How we do things in India versus how they do things in America, in Hollywood, is so far different that there's no school or no place you can get that short form. I'm talking about a time when the iPhone did not exist. I'm talking about a time when there was no WhatsApp and there was no social media in the true sense. So you're trying to now do things in what I would call, even though internet was still a new thing or is a recent thing, it's still sort of even more early days. And communicating across cultures, time zones, was complicated. People's perceptions, India is an untested, unproven marketplace. So the challenges were several, and our own inexperience was massive. So in hindsight, I can sort of be frustrated about some things, that how we were treated, how inequality is such a reality of life, and blah, blah, blah. There's no end to how many more layers I can add in. But the truth is, we did not know. I did not have half the experience or 10% of the knowledge I have today about how we actually need to understand how a different culture, a different country, a different industry works, even though we think we know it all. It's not the same. So those are the kind of things you learn through, like you got to step into the fire to get out of it, as they say, and you got to take on the challenge and get past it. And that sort of is the way we actually had to do it. And
so, as you said, from a garage to winning Oscars. So how do you think this, former and later journey looked like? Was it like...
Sorry, what journey?
So, this former journey to the journey, ahead globally looked like, the challenges, were it like too different? And if it were, then how was, the approach was same or different?
No, first of all, as I said, I started as an 18-year-old. I don't know how many of you are 18 or older, So if I'm your age, how do I know anything more than if I asked you, what will you do 5 years from now? How do you know? You've barely gotten out of school, you've just started something and you're trying to give it a shot. So I'm no different in that sense. You guys probably are smarter than I was at 18 because you all probably know more stuff. You have more access to information, more technologically adept, more academically qualified. So I did not have any of that. But the point is that, it's all coming to the place of aspiration and desire. And what is it that you want? The moment you answer that question, in your mind, and you say, that's what I'm going to do, you start off doing things one at a time. So if you asked me in the garage, did you think that you'd get an Oscar someday? Absolutely not. So, I'd love to sit here and tell you, look at my grand vision and see how much I knew. That's bullshit. It's a lie. You don't grandiose thinking doesn't just create the outcome. So I used to always say that, I don't, people think aim for the stars and you'll get to the top of the tree. I'm like, no, I don't do that. I aim for the tree, but I'm not willing to go one step below it. Like in my world, not getting to where you want to get to is not an option. So I don't want to say to you guys, from my standpoint, that aim for the stars and if you get to the top of the tree, that's a great outcome. In my world, it's not. Because that means I'm fooling myself. What I'm being very realistic about is that if I'm 18 and I say by the time I'm 20 or 21, I should be able to be here. I should be able to buy a car. I should be able to buy a house. I should be able to create a stable environment for my team. What is the most critical thing? I'm doing that, but I'm doing it and I'm pursuing something that I believe I want to build for the long term. And then life takes you down a track that nobody knows. And that is how I feel you get to create. Because just making great plans and thinking, trying to emulate what somebody else did is not the real world of how things work out for any entrepreneur. And that's why there are no two entrepreneurs who are the same. And in my mind, it's take it one step at a time. Enjoy your journey. You're going to create something. And that is what I always say to people, that the greatest value that you have possessed as human beings, as people, is our ability to create. Whether it is whether we procreate, a living organism in a child, or whether you create a business, or you see a plant, or you have a pet at home that you see grow, the joy that you get in seeing creation is second to none. And that to me is what you're pursuing. You're creating a career, you're creating a life, you're creating an opportunity. The moment you see that creation and you see it happen and you see it through, that automatically shows you the next level up. So to me, you get to the top of the tree and then you look at it and say, okay, I can now get to the top of that building. And then you get to the top of the building and you say, okay, now I can get to the top of that skyscraper. And then, because you just enjoy the track of getting there. And you got to enjoy success. You got to enjoy the process of creation. Because it is going to be a hard road. It is a very difficult road. It has lots of unknown. There's going to be lots of God knows what's going to happen. But you got to feel good about reaching that milestone. Otherwise, you're always going to be dissatisfied that I thought I was going to go and be one among the stars, but I only got to the top of the tree. That's not emotionally and mentally, you're not satisfying yourself. And I feel, again, you guys are in a business school. My point of always speaking to students or the youth is emotionally and mentally, you always have to be in a very positive, very can-do state of mind. And that does not happen if you feel like a failure every day. So you got to get out of bed knowing that that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to do it. Don't set unrealistic goals and not get to them, because then you give up on them. Set a goal that you're going to do, then do it. The moment you do it, you have to say, okay, now what's next? Because you don't necessarily get satisfied. In fact, it raises your confidence. It tells you that if I can do this, then I can do that, and then I can do better. And that progressively takes you to a higher and higher place. We won 6 Oscars in the last 8-9 years. Okay, I've named some of the biggest filmmakers, some of the biggest, most talented people, way more talented than we are. Mr. Nolan, who I am such a big fan of, won his first Oscar this year. We won 3 for his movies. He's won his first one. What does that say? The truth is, his talent and his vision is why we win what we win. But he got his first Oscar this year. So nobody can pre-program that. Nobody can pre-wire that. It happens, it happens. And if it doesn't happen, doesn't mean if it didn't win the Oscar, doesn't mean we were not good. We won it, great. It's a great feeling. But that's not where you set out of making your life. Your life cannot be a function of, if I win the Oscar, then I will be happy. If I get this, then I will be happy. Then you're actually shortchanging yourself. That's not the life you want to create, because then that means you're just externalizing your vision of yourself. You're saying, if the academy chose me, only then I'm successful. If someone else appreciated me, only then I'm successful. Is that the way you want to live the rest of your life? And judging your life through other people's eyes, that's not really a life. So at a very young age, my real piece of advice to all of you is that Do what you've set out to do. Don't allow yourself to cheat. Don't let yourself down. Don't be easy on yourself and say, it's okay, I'll do it tomorrow, day after. Like, if you got something to do, you're doing it. Like, in that regard, there is no compromise. And then what the result will be that none of us can control. So it's fine.
So speaking of setting goals, what major tips would you give in for people who are trying to get into VFX or trying to set up their businesses, or let's say take up jobs into this field?
It doesn't matter what you do. You've got to be the best version of what you want at that point in time. And you got to know that you're not fooling yourself. So you want to do visual effects. Why do you want to do it? Because you feel you've got a real talent, you've got a real love for it. Then you got to really be ready to embrace the pain of what it brings with it. Because nothing comes without pain. And if it comes without pain, then it's not really satisfying also. Any person who has it easy in life actually does not feel great. You never see a hero story where there was no challenge, there was no sacrifice, there was no hardship. You don't watch a movie where the hero gets to beat up the villain and just be the hero. Nobody considers that to be the hero. You always see the hero get beat up and the champion of the underdog, and that story plays out and you see that sort of play itself out. So that's the essence of how we as humans actually enjoy what we see in someone else's journey. You see lots of struggle, you see lots of difficulty, and you win because you show you're relentless about it. So my point is, whether you do visual effects or decide to set up a business, ask yourself, what is it that you really want from yourself, from your life? And then you're just doing it. And then the order of the day is you train yourself, you collaborate with people, you set your goals, you don't beat yourself up for failing, you learn from your failures and just keep pushing ahead. Because, like I always say to my team, tell us what we can do, I'm scared of failure. I said, the only difference is you don't know how many failures I've had. You have no idea about how many mistakes I made. So I can sit here like an expert and talk to you about things. But if you ask me the question, Namit, how many mistakes did you make and how big were those mistakes? I made the biggest mistakes that no other executive in my company is allowed to make. And you got to reconcile with that reality that if you make the mistake, you fix it. There's nothing, it's not end of life. It's just, that's how we learn.
Right. I think going a little back in the memories, I think COVID-19 is not very, this thing for, like very old for a lot of people. A lot of people lost hopes in the industry. A lot of people actually, began with something new within that time. People started working at home. People have shot some great films at home as well. So what was your take when, COVID hit the film industry, and how do you think it has, or if it has impacted, how and how much?
I think COVID in many ways was a great leveler because, for the first time you had somebody with 50 years of experience and somebody with 25 years of experience, somebody with 2.5 years of experience or zero experience. The truth is nobody knew how to navigate a COVID because nobody had experienced it. It's like if I go to my father who's incredibly hardworking and very successful in his own right, it's not like he knows how to navigate a COVID because it never happened in his life. I can ask him in different times of his life how he may have navigated his film production career, this, that, and the other. But when COVID struck, it's not like there was advice available from anyone because nobody knew how to do it. So what happens in that moment is you suddenly realize everybody's the same. Whether you have 20 years of experience, whether you have zero experience. Nobody knows any better. Film industry or any industry was not spared. So everybody had a pretty hard reality that one had to deal with, from a very clear life threat to loss of business, loss of employment, loss of customers, just loss all around. But the good thing about that is that the whole world comes together. Adversity brings opportunity, adversity brings people together. Everybody thinks about how we're going to get out of this. So the sense of collaboration and the sense of constructive ideation goes up significantly. And that's what happened. So we were able to pivot to working from home very quickly. Security protocols in our industry that are super high. People are scared about piracy and how content can be leaked. Suddenly we were doing things that we never thought we would have ever been allowed to do, where you take your work home or your working on your home computer and you've got these big, massive movies that are all being produced, and you're still managing to keep it all under wraps. But people understood, and people, really responded to it very well. And the negative impact of COVID, I feel, is more today than what happened back in the day, because we were able to quickly adapt to a new way of working. But I feel like it's taken it too far. The reluctance of people to get back to work, to not work in groups. Imagine if all of you were not sitting together in a classroom and everybody's on a Zoom screen. Without your actual interaction, how will you learn from each other? How do you exchange ideas? How do you build each other up? How do you really collaborate? And that, there's nothing like being together in a room. There's nothing like being together in the same space, whether you have a coffee together, whether you really talk about stuff that's not specific to your job. There's a lot of interaction and energy transfer that happens, which I feel the industry or some of the people that work for us, I feel that we got to change that around.
Speaking of working, what all projects were you working when COVID-19 hit?
Oh, that was our biggest year in the history of the company. So we literally had, from the last James Bond to Wonder Woman, Dune 1, Fast and the Furious. There were like a whole plethora of projects that were all sitting in a release calendar, literally from March all the way to November. And it just, in many ways, it was good fortune that we were the busiest that we were able to pivot to work from home and really stretch the projects out. But, it also, as I said, that, had its own impact, that people got comfortable in the idea that if I can do all of this great work from home, why do I need to get back to the office?
Right. So, speaking of professionals who have worked with you or who you hired, are there any particular, courses or let's say a particular path that you would like to tell people who are getting into this careers ahead? The profession who are trying to, sure, you've said the right thing that you got to train yourself every day better. But is there a specific path, do you think, that they should be, following to get into the industry or to work on themselves?
I think, the thing is that, see, what we do is incredibly artistic in many ways, has a lot of technology in it. Ultimately, it's a business. So there's no way to exist in a business and say, I don't understand business, I don't understand finance. You can't try to run a business and say, I don't understand finance. You got to understand all the components of what you do. And, in our business, there's obviously a lot of challenges that come with being a creative business. Means it's subjective. Technology means it's constantly changing. And finances, numbers are black and white. So you've got two variables, and you've got, most people, if you think about, they say the left brain and the right brain. Either you're an artist or a technologist, and you've got either a finance brain or you don't. And that in our business or in our specific industry, I feel like to really succeed, you got to hit all three, verticals, and that is not easy. So you got to be, conscious of what that means. You got to have creative aspirations. You got to understand technology, and you got to understand how business and money and people's livelihood comes together. So, the direct advice would be that you can only learn so much in a school or in a college. You have to have self-interest to learn what you're ultimately going to do. And the best way to give an example to people is, I have kids at home, and they go to school, and you can send them to if somebody's interested in a sport, what will you see? You don't have to ever force them to go play cricket or go play football or go play tennis. The moment you're interested in that, even when they're not in their school or even if they're not in their class, they're still practicing. You'll see a kid with a bat and ball. You'll see a guy with a football running around because they're obsessed by it. They love that. So that's the joke I tell my kids. How come for football I never have to force you to go and play? Why don't I have to force you to go for your cricket class? Why do I have to force you to go to school? So ultimately you got to pick the line of work where it becomes your equivalent of a cricket or a football in whatever you pick, so that you enjoy the moment. Even if you're losing in a football match, you still want to play better. If you lose a cricket game, you may come home crying, but you want to go back and do well the next day. So why is it in our careers or in our schools we don't do the same thing? And that sort of is where I want to tell the youth and the next generation that your life cannot not be that fun that you have. You can't say, I hate my job, but I love playing football. I hate my job or my career, but I love to go and, like, you can't spend 80% of your waking life doing something you don't like. You have to enjoy that part of your life where you should not be feeling like it's work. If you feel it's work and it's a task and you don't like it, then you shouldn't do it. Because how will you excel at it? And even if you come under pressure and you do it once, twice, it's not sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, then at some point you're going to say enough. Whereas if you're a sportsman or if you have a particular hobby, if you like to paint, if you like to write poetry, you'll always see yourself gravitating back towards that. And I'm saying, why don't we do that with our careers? Why don't we find something that we like to do so much that 8 hours of your life you do that, and for 1 or 2 hours you do something you don't like? Why don't you turn it on its head? And I think you'll see how well you will succeed in that. And in that paradigm, it doesn't matter what it is that you do. If you like cooking or cleaning or playing a sport or playing a musical instrument, and if you really want to do that, then you do it. And that will take you to a very different paradigm of life and success and happiness that only you can have. And only you will be able to know that, because any other person will never know.
So speaking of changing times, how do you think AI and Gen AI is going to affect the VFX landscape?
Again, I don't like to just talk about VFX because that's AI and Gen AI is beyond all of that. Ultimately, I take a simplistic approach in the sense that ultimately Gen AI doesn't create itself. Human beings create it. So all technology is to serve people. Technology is a tool in our hands. The mobile phone is a tool in my hand. So is a computer, so is a software, so is an app, so is Gen AI. And the more sophisticated the tool, the more sophisticated our ability. If we learn how to use that tool, the better we can be with it. So you got to use technology for what it's worth. As I say the same thing to my kids, I'm saying to you, I'm saying, the technology works for you, you don't work for technology. You are superior to technology. It doesn't matter what it is. Now, do you recognize that? Do you ultimately believe that to be true or not? Excel cannot run a formula unless you put that formula and you put the right assumptions in it. So Excel cannot have the right assumptions. It can only have the right answer. And the value is in the assumption, not in the answer. Because the assumption ultimately drives the answer. So Gen AI is certainly in our industry, in every industry, is going to, I think, add significant scale in efficiency, in our ability to be more productive. If we would do if physically we could do 10 steps in a day, we could do 50 steps in a day. That's a great outcome. So you can do more in less time. That's efficiency, which means you can dream bigger, which means you can create more stuff. We talk about Gen AI and AI on one side. You also have the Apple Vision Pro that's come, and so is many different immersive devices. Can you imagine how much more content is needed? From going from a 2D or a 3D screen, you're in a 360-degree environment. All that needs new technology. All that needs new capabilities of, tools that can enable all of that. So every technology brings its own opportunity, and it replaces the next and the next. So the people who fear that are fearing evolution. And it's like if you fear what will happen to you when you become 30 years old, why should you fear it? You'll get older, you'll get better, you'll have more experience. It's the same person that you are at 18 who will be 30. That's not regressive, that's progressive. So technology has to be seen in the same light, that you evolve, technology evolves, but you can't let that overtake you. So you got to be relevant, you got to understand. It's like saying today, I'm sorry, I don't know how to use a mobile phone. I'm sorry, I don't know how to use basic tools. Like that becomes it's like, I don't know numbers. I don't know how to count 1 to 10. If you go back 200 years or even 100 years, telling somebody to count 1 to 100 was as hard as using AI. Today, a 2-year-old kid can use an iPad and count numbers because that's the pace at which evolution has happened. So I just, I don't like to make it sound like it's oversimplification of tech, but that's what it's supposed to be. If you make it too complicated, if you make it this monster that you can't control, then it's going to eat you up.
Definitely. All right. So speaking of working on new technologies, similarly, you work with new people every day. So speaking of these two worlds that we speak of, Bollywood and Hollywood, how do you think the approaches of the director are different towards a particular project that it is happening?
I think it's less about the director's approach. It's more about the process of production that plays out. Because you've got much more, firstly, the content they make is, a Hollywood filmmaker thinks about the world as the market. So they are always thinking about how will this piece of content be produced, distributed, consumed, not just in America or in Hollywood, but to the entire world. Whereas if you think about Bollywood or Hindi filmmakers are now trying to see if we can even tell a story that India will consume. Because even that's not been the case. The Telugu industry has its own industry, Tamil has its own, Malayalam has its own, Hindi is its own thing. And we've not even been able to crystallize or a framework to what I would call pan-India storytelling. And that is sort of the number one challenge, because we've been more sort of insular or said, we make this for this state. We make that in that language. Whereas Hollywood says, I don't care if you're Indian, German, French, Canadian, or Australian. I want to make a piece of content that everybody should be able to watch and feel that sense of emotion. So their vision, their approach, and therefore the attention to detail becomes much more critical. The assumptions become more well thought out because you're taking on a much bigger challenge that people with such diverse cultures and across the world are going to watch and be enthralled by the same thing. If you watch Avatar in America or you watch Avatar in India or in Japan, they're making sure that it should be an experience that everybody in the world should say, wow. So that's a thing that I think starts at that point. Then in terms of actual execution and process, the budgets, the people involved, their discipline, then it's a much longer session on how intricately how each industry works differently. But I would say at the real top of the tree, it's who they think the target audience is and who the world is that they're making this for.
We would love to know, how Dneg has been there and, what are its core offering to the world out here?
So Dneg, basically, as we call it, is a world-class, company that works with the best talent across the world, from the US, UK, Canada, India, Australia, and everywhere else in between. So the offerings are primarily focused on, the visual effects side for movies, TV shows, animation, special projects, special venues. When we talk about, like a Harry Potter ride or a theme park rides that are all becoming digitally enabled. There's digital virtual concerts that are now talking about being made. So we basically take the idea of creative storytelling and experiences and trying to bring that to the screen, regardless of what screen it goes on. And that is sort of the core of how we approach Dneg. And then whether it's for India or America, it doesn't matter. Whether it's for the UK or Australia, it doesn't matter, because that's just a way in which we apply the same technology, the tools and the talent to deliver that. But that sort of has been the core mainstay of what Dneg does. On the other side, we have our parent company, Prime Focus Studios, that is focused in also creating content and collaborating with content creators. So like Brahmastra was one film, but we're producing this animated film called Garfield. The Garfield animated film comes out May 24th worldwide. That's a co-production between us and Alcon Entertainment from Hollywood. Chris Pratt is the main lead character in that film, amongst other very, very big names. And like that, we've got a few Hollywood productions. We've got productions that are going on in India. So we're steering the idea of saying we've got technology here that is the tools in the hands of our artists. We've got content creation where we are creatively and producing and collaborating and financing those with our customers or our partners. And then we just do the plain vanilla services that we have done, and is one of our main capabilities.
Right. So, speaking of, your clients worldwide in India or globally, is there a special story attached to how did you get your first client? Because I think that's something memorable to everybody.
I think the point is that we've had several such stories across, because we started in television, TV production when I started the company. Then we moved to advertising, then film, then we moved internationally, and everything. In the way I've at least felt that my journey has played out. We always started at the bottom of the barrel and then built ourselves up one step at a time. So that was a big deal for us to really move from this little technology that you bought, and then suddenly you had this opportunity when everything was down and out, that we got this opportunity on Avatar because we had done something that nobody had done before. So amongst a few companies in the world, we were one of the few that had this opportunity to work on Avatar. And on the back of Avatar, we created this process to take movies from 2D and turn it into 3D. And that really became a game changer for us. So from having delivered Avatar in 2009, we became the world's biggest company in 18 months in the process of taking 2D movies and putting it in 3D. And whether it was Star Wars or Harry Potter, Transformers, Gravity, we worked on some of the most, the biggest franchises in a good 12, 18 months on something that was a very small part of the business, went through massive disruption, and then you literally in 2 years became a world leader. So that was it's like a boom bust story that you kind of went up and down, but our ability to have navigated through the use of new technology and applying that in a new form really saved the day and transformed our business.
So, how this film industry is all flashy from, like for the outsiders of the industry. They look like, it all look like stars and all flashy. It's all up there. So what do you think or what do you say are the major challenges for a company like yours to be in the game and to be at the top? What are the real challenges that you personally has felt?
See, first of all, I try to say that, in a business that's led by creative talent, with absolute dependencies on technology, and where for the most part of our business, you're told, okay, that's my budget, that's how much money I have, and you got to do it. Now, you can say I have only so much money or whatever, but ultimately, you're asking me to create something that you've never seen before. We're using technology that's never been tested before. So that challenge is a constant challenge on each and every job that we do. It's not because sometimes you've got not enough money, sometimes you don't have enough time, sometimes you're attempting something that no one's seen before. Like a lot of times, our brief will be, we got to do something that no one's seen before. So what does that mean? If no one's seen before, that means I'm going to imagine something, create it, use technology to make it feel real, and then make sure you do it in a certain budget and time. So that's a complex business challenge that we deal with on a continuous basis. And that is really where I come from, that whole idea of saying, take on a challenge, deal with conflict and communicate, because that's how you try and resolve it. So we take on the challenge of saying, never been done before. Now that we're going to do it, things don't work, technology is not tested, that's conflict. And then we got to work with all our teams, creative people, finance people, technology people, management, coming together and making it happen. And it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of pressure. But once you kind of get good at it, it kind of becomes infectious, because you're like, okay, what's the next challenge? Let's make it happen. So that sort of is the core of at least our business and how we've succeeded.
Going through so many challenges, obviously every project that you work on, what has been your biggest breakthrough in your business? After which you were like, okay, this is the level up that I'm sure that you've said that before, that you keep aiming for high, but what is the biggest breakthrough that you'll always remember for your company?
Oh, there have been many, because we every 5 years, as I was saying to you all earlier, that I only dream getting to the top of the tree, and then I kind of change the goalpost after that. So every 5 years I felt, in my journey now, and it's almost going to be 30 years next year. So even though, like I said, I started when I was 18, so 30 years, I'm not that old, but feels like I've been doing it all my life. But every 5 years, 3 to 5 years, we've sort of been able to reimagine and challenge ourselves for the next journey up. And in the very first few years, you didn't have the money, you didn't have the resources, you didn't have the facilities. 15 years later, you had all of that, but you did not know how to break into a Hollywood marketplace. So everything has kind of had its own very complex and very challenging circumstances around it. Sometimes you're dealing with a COVID, sometimes you're dealing with a writers and actors strike that happened in our industry last year. So, we've kind of gotten used to being the poster child of, my running joke with my team is that we get 1 or 2 good years and then we get beat up for 2 or 3 years. And again, we got to re-engineer and redevelop our capabilities. So, it's there's no one specific breakthrough I can talk about, but I can say that the fact that today we are recognized as a world leader in the West and in the East does give me a lot of sense of calm that I don't have to walk into every room introducing myself from scratch. Because, it's like 10 years later, when I was in the first 10, 12 years of running Prime Focus in India, I kind of go to America, buy businesses, launch a very big studio in Hollywood. And when I say to them, hi, I'm Namit Malhotra from Prime Focus, they're like, who is Prime Focus and who's Namit Malhotra? So even though we were the most successful brand in India, having done over 300-400 movies, it meant nothing in Hollywood. So it was like, even though we were a massive leader in our business, financially successful, we were considered to be nobody. And that meant that we had to start from scratch and build ourselves up. So I can say that today, I don't have to have that level of introduction when I go to America or Hollywood or anywhere in the world. I think our resume speaks volumes of what we've been able to execute. And that does make me feel like that's the biggest breakthrough, that I think in a 100-year industry in Hollywood and India, there hasn't been any other company or person that I think has had the fortune of really building the bridge between the two sides of the world. And so I take a lot of pride and a lot of pleasure in that I had the opportunity to be able to do that and make that happen, which is really makes me proud as an Indian and makes me proud to feel that in our industry we made that happen. So that's sort of is my biggest takeaway.
I think all of this has been really great insights to people who would hear this out information to start their careers ahead. I'm going to have a quick, fun, rapid fire round with you. So, starting with the first question: if not this profession, what else you think you would have been doing?
See, I'm obsessive about car racing. So when I was a young 14-year-old, I started driving. I won't encourage anybody to do it. But I did do that, and I really, as an alternative option in my life, I just loved the thrill of car racing. And my favorite driver was a guy called Ayrton Senna, Formula One driver. He died very young, and just for additional trivia and information, my older son is named Ayrton, so he's Artin Malhotra. So that would have been my other. In my alternate life, I'd love to have been that if I could have.
All right, because you have been in the movie industry for so long. So if there was a movie which had to be made on your life, what genre it would fit in?
I don't know. I like superhero movies. I like all kinds of dramas. I like the movies where it's a champion of the underdog story. Because I've always felt like an underdog my entire life, even today. I'd never see myself as the world leader. I always, in my head, in the way I think about myself and the challenge ahead, I always feel I'm the underdog and I got to rise up to the occasion. And because I come from a film background, I'm like, it's normal for the underdog to get beaten up, to lose, and then he wins in the end. So every time I'm losing, I'm like, it's okay. You're the underdog. You have to get beaten up. You have to lose. But ultimately, you'll win. So, that sort of has been my, that's the way I visualize storytelling. That's how we visualize movies. That sort of is how I see my story as well.
And who would play the lead role in your story?
Oh.
Give me that one favorite name.
No, see, I grew up as an absolute Amitabh Bachchan fan. So, for me, and he was the master of that genre or of that space. And, so for me, he's always been my all-time great, and he will always be that.
Okay, so which is that one source of inspiration which gets you up every time that you are down? Whenever there's this low point, which is that one source of inspiration that you look up to?
So I think, it's a great question, from a standpoint of, I've sort of seen the complexities in my business, my industry, and I have also got this history and track record of being someone who succeeded in spite of all the challenges. So I always say to myself, the fact that things are not going your way is the opportunity that you got to fix. Because if you fix it, you will win. And that, I give myself a lot of, let's say, credit for the attitude I possess, not for anything else, to sort of never say die. And so I'm always enthused by the idea of saying, okay, it's not going my way. I don't like what's happening. But if anybody can fix it, you can. So that's my sort of, it's like I'm fighting in my own mind that it's not going my way. I don't like it. I'm not happy, but I can't. Like, you talk to yourself and you say, but if anybody can do it, you can. So don't make it about somebody else. It's your life. You got to make it. Go and do it. And that's how I sort of spring back into action and don't let things take me down for too much.
For the super life that you've lived and for the super aims that you believe in, who is your favorite superhero?
Superhero. So I've loved the rendition of Chris Nolan's version of Batman. Was one of my favorite superhero. But my favorite film of all time is actually a very contrarian character called Forrest Gump. So it's sort of, as a film, I've always felt that to be the most complete rendition of a person, their journey, their simplicity, and their not being faced through all the ups and downs that you sort of face in life. So superhero Batman, but favorite film character Forrest Gump.
All right. And if we had to talk about a favorite song or a song which you believe, definitely dedicate to your entrepreneurial journey, what that would be, if you could sing us.
I can't sing to save my life, but
nobody's going to judge you for that.
No. I can't hear the sound of my voice. Even if you played back my interview back to me, I won't be able to look at myself or hear it. So
you can name it.
But so one of my favorite bands is a band called Coldplay, and there's a song called Champion of the World, which really, is the song or the story of a young boy, who's kind of growing up and is constantly moving on his journey and riding a little bicycle and flying into space and trying to do things that have never been done before. So I just love that, every time. Like, it brings me goose flesh every time I listen to that. So I think I probably relate with that the most.
All right. And is there a recent series or a movie that you have binge watched?
2 movies and 2, not series, but I have watched both films multiple times. I watched Oppenheimer 4 times in the theater, which is 3 hours plus. I watched Animal 4 times also. So pretty diametric opposite. So and every time I speak to the people who are attached to it, they're like 3.5 hours at each point, when I actually believe I have a very short memory and, I find hard to, sit for too long. But both these have actually been 3-hour plus engagements, and I've seen them multiple times for what it's worth. And that sort of is the 2, one in Hollywood and one in India, that I think has really been... that has enthused my mind.
Is it a movie that has, given this huge impact, or something that you've, a learning that you have taken away from it?
See, you kind of grow up in the film business. My friends would jokingly say, you're very filmy, all through life. Like, I think of our expression is more dramatic, so I can't tell you if there's one particular film, but there is multiple films, multiple characters that you sort of see, and the attitude and what you learn from the movies, what you learn from those stories and characters is that mindset and attitude, which like I said, when you see yourself get beat up, you're like, he can do it, I can do it. You sort of correlate with that energy and you kind of go back and do your thing, except that that's in a fictional world and you're doing it in the real world, if there's such a thing. And that is how we've sort of approached, or I have approached rather, my life. So like I said, don't let anything bother me too long. I have to find some outlet for it and get back in the game and get back into the fight.
Well, speaking of the new age world that is coming up to, is there a particular technology that you would bet your money on?
No, nothing specific, but I almost feel like technology has become, it's another word for oxygen. So you don't try to live without oxygen. You don't try to live without technology. You don't fight nature or energy. You don't fight technology. You embrace it. You learn it. You adapt. And that is really, and it's not easy. Nothing is easy, but that's what we got to do, And people who say, I am not going to do this, I'm not going to so I keep myself as relevant as I can. It's not easy, but I try and do my best in keep being open-minded about that and trying to see what the world has to offer. Because technology is not just impacting the virtual world, technology is impacting the real world. Today technology is there in how cars are made, and technology is applicable in how, the new world of where robots will come in and operate, or in the most basic functions of how food is made today, or how certain functions, or how, how these food delivery companies operate, or technology has become a part of everything that we do. So for me, it's like, it's another way to use technology to improve your life. That's how I look at it.
What is your favorite reading source to stay on, what's happening around the world?
I'm not much of a reader. I don't try to, overload my mind with too many points of view, because I feel like the more I can be sort of self-realized and the more I can think about things and matters. Of course, every once in a while, I will read something that catches my attention, and I'm more interested in the abstract than in the specific. Because for me, anything that's easily available as straight, simple knowledge is too generic. And I don't need to know history as much as I believe I need to know the powers that make things happen. So I'm a little more of an abstract reader when I'm actually in the space. I tried to read the Gita recently and I haven't completed it, but I know that it has had a very profound impact in the pages that I read. In fact, I would encourage all of you, when you all read texts written by everybody in the world, just pick up the easiest version of the Gita and read it, and you'll refresh your mind in ways that you can't even imagine. And I think it's a bit unfortunate that most institutions in our country have tried to create curriculums and reading materials of what the West has and say, oh, that's what you study in Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and this, that, and the other. But I'm saying the core essence of knowledge that we've got in the Gita that really represents itself in so many different ways is nothing compares to it. So, I haven't done a great job at reading it, but in this phase all of you are at, the more you guys can actually understand it and learn from it and be inspired by it, I think you will have a unique advantage to anybody in the world, because it's so profound and so impactful and so relevant. And so that is where I would really encourage everybody to just, again, you don't have to be the master of it, but just have it splintered or sprinkled in your mind a little bit. And I think you'll have a very different realization about relationships in the world and how we approach things and how we approach ourselves.
So, speaking of a leader, speaking of a leader who has built this leading company, who is that one or a name that you have in head, a leader or a motivation that you look up to?
So all along,
or a founder that you would.
So all along, see, I started my business in a garage with an Apple computer, and I never used any other computer before or after that, even though we buy technology from everywhere. But for some reason, Apple became my my go-to company. In many ways, behind every Apple product, it would say designed in California, assembled in China. And I kind of emulated that in my business model because I was like, designed in the West, produced in India. Like that became the motto on which I started to build my own creative capability in the company. So Apple and Steve Jobs really inspired me to think, because it was again a blend of technology and creativity. So if you see the simplicity of Apple, that it actually makes technology simple. It makes it usable. It makes it intuitive. It makes it almost like I said, a 2-year-old kid could use an iPad or an iPhone. So to me, that's how technology should be. That's the genius of what Steve Jobs created. And I think, I don't think there's any other company that's come close to, since Apple, to really, every product, every usable experience they make, the simplicity with which they do it is pretty powerful. And I think that is, that demystifying tech and making it usable is beautiful. And I think that's where you apply the creative and the technical at the same time. And I think that's Apple and Apple's success. So I really admire what he did.
Okay, and is there a brand that you love for, let's say, its brand language? Is there a particular brand that you see that, okay, this storytelling is something that you love for it? Maybe not because of the product, but because of the brand itself.
See, again, Apple to me just comes out at white, simple symbol of an apple with a bite on it. Stay hungry, stay foolish, think different. There's some pretty interesting taglines that come from either Steve Jobs or Apple itself. Think different, it's simple. It just is, to me, I just find that very complete. And it's just literally white. There's nothing too flashy. There's nothing too clever in that sense. But it's incredibly powerful and very easy to identify. So that sort of is my absolute favorite.
One last, quick tip for people to bring in the right business. What do you think one right approach every businessman or a businesswoman, entrepreneur, founders, from this institute and around the world should follow, you think?
See, I think, there has to be an ultimate desire to deliver the outcome. And that is has to take precedence over everything else. Because ultimately, whether you're selling a product or a service, you're doing it so that somebody else on the other side is either buying it or consuming that service. And that, to ensure that you're going the extra mile to deliver that outcome, is the core validation of whatever you're creating. And that is in the hands of the entrepreneur to remove all the challenges, all the blocks, all the people, all the structure, to cut through that and make it happen so that you're ultimately delivering value to your end user and consumer. And that is when people who build up that attitude and that mindset of perfection or performance, I think that cannot go unnoticed. Everybody recognizes someone who's working incredibly hard, is incredibly committed to actually deliver a great outcome. And that is what I would say to any, and that's why I said, it doesn't matter what business you make. Whether you make $1 billion or $1 million, or just make no money, but you just build something that you are passionate about. Ultimately, what you build must have value in the hands of the user. And that is where you've created success. And that success is the greatest enabler for everything. Because that success will make you happy. When you're happy, you will want to do more. And it just becomes a virtuous cycle that you will be able to run on. And then sky is the limit. Then you steer your life, your ambition, your goal to whatever you want to achieve. Because now you set the base of whatever it is that you're trying to do, and then just make it happen.
Well, Namit, thank you so much. Sure. It was a great pleasure here to have you, to listen to all of it. And I'm sure it was an insightful session for everybody. Can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you.